Members, the last item before us then, and probably what many people would consider the main item, is the resolution. The chair will move the RES 06 resolution, which is the budget resolution underneath House File, House Rule 4.03. And I'll just go through the resolution, members. It allows a maximum limit on net expenditures of $2 million for the fiscal years 16 and 17. And the idea behind that is that this would be sort of the other bills category. And the other items that are on here for the other finance bills net out to zero. So we would have roughly the $900 million surplus that is available divided between the Transportation Committee and the Tax Committee. As members know, those bills passed last year. They're in conference. It doesn't really seem to make any sense to try to set targets for those because they've already passed through this committee and are really a matter for the leaders of the House and Senate to work out in terms of what the targets for those committees would be. So I don't have the tax bill and transportation bill listed as having targets because of that. But otherwise, as we go down through the list, you can see there is a modest adjustments for many of the bills, a negative $1,930,000 for the agriculture finance bill, a negative $3,135,000 in debt service for the capital investment bill, which would allow a $600 million general obligation bonding bill, limit of zero for the education finance bill, although I understand that there are some other funds that are available that school districts have actually requested that would allow for some other spending there, but it would net at zero. A positive target of $3,900,000 for the Environment and Natural Resources bill, a limit of zero for the Health and Human Services Finance bill and the Higher Education bill, limit of $11,665,000 for the Job Growth and Energy Affordability Finance bill, a limit of a negative $1 million for the Public Safety and Crime Prevention bill, and a limit of a negative $9,500,000 for the State Government Finance bill. And members, in proposing this, I guess the philosophy behind it is we, as you all know, fund state government on a two-year basis. We funded the state for the current fiscal year that we are in and the fiscal year 2017 last year. We had some substantial increases in that biennium and that funding from the previous biennium. And so this budget resolution would allow some reallocation of spending that was done, allow some budget reductions in some committees that would be offset by additional higher spending on some priorities in other committees. But as a net amongst the various budgets would equal zero, which would allow for the roughly $900 million surplus that is available to be available for the Transportation Committee and the Tax Committee, which were the two committees that did not get omnibus bills passed last year. So members, with that, I would be open to discussion and amendments on the RES 06 resolution. Representative Wagenius.
Yes, I was looking at the capital investment that will enable 600 million GO bonds.
Yes.
So when we were hearing about capital investment before, we were hearing that it was going to be 800 million, and half would go to transportation and half otherwise. And so just to understand now that it's 600, will it be half transportation and half otherwise, or will it be 400 transportation and 200 otherwise?
Well, I guess Representative Wagenius, I guess I don't know where you were hearing that from. I know I never said that. The $800 million number came about because that was what was in the budget forecast. And the assumption has been when the Office of Management and Budget puts out the forecast for the last few years that there would be an $800 million bonding bill in the even-numbered years. But of course, what there actually is subject to what the legislature and then what the governor decide to do. And so that's kind of where the $800 million number came from. It carried forward from last year. I know we didn't think that it made sense to try to change the $800 million assumption last year because we didn't know what the situation would be with the budget and the economy and such this year and until this year. So now that we're here and now that it's time to set the resolution for this year, I guess as we've looked at it, you know, the debt service is the fastest growing major budget area that we have over the last several years. I guess it's my feeling that we should be pulling back a bit from the $800 million. We did spend $180 million roughly in general obligation bonding in the bonding bill last year. So if you added that to the $600 million, we're almost at $800 million. And so that's the reasoning behind why we're at $600 million. And I guess, at least from my standpoint, there's never been an assumption about the division between transportation and other projects. And, you know, what the committee decides to do on this will be subject to Chair Torkelson and the committee. Representative Wagenius.
Yes, if I could follow up, it's been reported that the speaker has been telling constituencies that it would be divided half transportation and half otherwise. So I'm trying to figure out, does that mean 300 for transportation and 300 otherwise, or 400, since that was the thing we were thinking about for transportation, and 200 otherwise?
Well, Representative Wagenius, I actually have not heard the speaker say that. If he did say that, I guess I don't know when he said it, but it is, as you know, a subject for the Capital Investment Committee, and they all have to decide how they best feel the bill should be divided up. Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you. I ask because one of the things that the governor has put in his bonding proposal was quite a bit of money for infrastructure, for wastewater treatment, and for drinking water. And that is something that helps everyone across the state. And I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't getting lost, and I feel like if there's only $200 or $300 million, that water and drinking water could be minimized, and that's one of my concerns.
Well, thank you, Representative Wagenius. I guess I would tell you just personally, I think that's an important area too, and it'll be up to the committee on what they decide to do on it, but if I have any say, certainly I think that's an important area that should get some funding. Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand your logic in kind of explaining the blank that we have on the transportation line item. But, you know, from, you know, when I calculate, you know, what you would have, even if you would take just about all of that and put that into transportation, you know, this 900 million, or, you know, some parts of it for tax, some parts of it for transportation, we're still going to be short, you know, on a long-term basis. You know, the parties have agreed. You know, last session, you know, there was a little fight about, you know, how much do we need for roads and bridges, to fix roads and bridges. And the parties generally agreed, you know, it's around $700 million on an annual basis into the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. And, you know, I think if you were to sort of do some kind of split between the tax bill and the transportation bill, even hypothetically 50-50, you know, even with the majority's plan to shift from the general fund significant monies into a dedicated fund of transportation, I don't even think you guys have it dedicated, but it's the auto parts sales tax, which I'm warming up to that a little bit. But even if you were to do that, and use your one-time general fund money as you envision, we still fall short of the need. And that's my concern. And it's the plan that you have on the table is very short-term. It's just one-time money from, I think, a very fleeting, temporary surplus. And so, boy, I really hope we can get together on this issue in transportation funding and get something done this session. But, you know, this, you know, kind of repeating last year's plan, I just don't think it's going to get us anywhere close to where we need to be. So, again, I understand the logic of how you put this into the budget resolution, but, if we're just going back to House File 4, we're just going to fall short of the revenue that we need for the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. And of course, 400 million of that has to go to the Trunk Highway Fund, and that's where we fund the state troopers and all these other things. So, just wanted to comment on that, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Hornstein, I would say that I share your feeling that we need to be putting more money into transportation. And of course, the bill is in the conference committee, and I guess we'll have to see what they come up with. But like you, I hope that we can come up with a robust transportation package.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, going back for a moment to follow up on what Representative Wardganius was pointing out relative to the capital investment bill at 600 million, that's far below what our debt capacity can handle. The governor, in fact, I think he was at 1.4 billion, if I recall, was well within the capacity. And so a couple of things I'd like to point out, and we had this debate a year ago when we dealt with capital investment, but I kept saying it was a target of opportunity. Unfortunately, it's still there because interest rates are still relatively low. And we still have huge infrastructure needs. Met today with Rosenstone from the Minskew system, and he was very concerned about their HEAPR needs, maintaining our vast investment in that case in our state colleges and universities. But you can go into almost all areas of state government, and we have slipped behind on our infrastructure. And I would say that the 600 million just simply does not recognize that. And we do have important and issues that are now front and center, as Representative Wardganius pointed out, in terms of water quality. Hugely important issue, an issue that Minnesotans across the state have expressed a lot of concern about. And I just would hope that you reconsider that 600 million, because I think it's far too low when you look at the needs of the state.
Oh, thank you, Representative Carlson. I guess the only thing I would say on it is there's been some discussion about what the debt capacity of the state is, and my recollection is that the way it used to be calculated, you'd look at this, I believe it was like a 3.25% of personal income standard, which if you look at the debt capacity report says that we have a debt capacity now of 968 million, which is certainly well above the 600 million. And I guess I, personally don't believe that we should necessarily spend as much as we possibly can. I don't think we should necessarily max out the state credit card just because we can. But the Office of Management and Budget has come up with some different views of what the state's debt capacity is in recent years that go beyond what that $968 million number is. And, I guess based on what's been done in the past, it's my view that what the governor is recommending is beyond what we've considered the state's debt capacity in the past. But you're right, Representative Carlson, this proposal is certainly less than our capacity. I have no argument with that.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, the main point I'm trying to make is we know what the need is. And Mr. Chairman, I think with that 600 million, we're not recognizing what that huge need is across the state of Minnesota. But when I talk about the target of opportunity, it's low interest rates, and we don't know how long those low interest rates are going to remain. I think we had a bit of luck. I argued that point last year, and fortunately they're still somewhat low. When we've gone out to bid, we've gotten some good bids, but how long that will remain, and that determines the number of projects as well, because the interest rates determine the debt service, as we all know. So those are the 2 points that I'm trying to make is relative to the bonding bill, and basically the same argument that I was making a year ago. I told you at the time it was going to grow, and if you're fortunate enough to get this through the House at $600 million, I suspect it'll grow. It has to grow if we're going to really meet the needs of the state of Minnesota.
Representative Wagenius.
Let me pass for just a minute, because I do want to come back to his argument, but let some other folks talk. But I would like to be recognized when
Representative
we
Liebling.
have a little fairer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have a couple of questions maybe. So with the Health and Human Services target of 0, I'm wondering, is there going to be a bill, and we've heard quite a number of bills this session in Chair Dean's committee that are asking to spend lots and lots and lots of money. And that's, of course, very common for Health and Human Services, where things cost a lot of money. But I'm wondering then if the plan is to have a finance bill that funds some items and tries to find savings in other places. So that's kind of my first question. My second question is whether there's a target for the Healthcare Access Fund. If that's contemplated now, if there is such a target that's going to be brought forward, if the target is 0, since nothing is mentioned here about that.
Representative Liebling, it's certainly my anticipation that there will be a Health and Human Services bill. It's my anticipation that there will be bills for all the finance committees, the 9 finance committees that have been identified on here. I expect that there will be some reallocation in the Health and Human Services Committee, and so there will be, some places of savings and then some places of additional spending to equal 0. And there is not, at this time, a target for the Healthcare Access Fund. Yep. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe this question is for Representative Cornish. I'm looking at the budget target for public safety, and it shows a cut of $1 million. And then I saw there's a press release that said that the funds were going to come out of MNCOR. So the question is, as part of your budget targets, are any other funds subject to people moving them around, or did you place limits on the ability for other committees to raid funds within their jurisdiction? Mr. Chair and Representative Cornish.
Representative Cornish.
The DFL, I think, alerted the news crew today that the money was coming out of MNCOR, so they came down to Representative Hillstrom's room, and then they came to mine. And since the Roberts Rules of Order and Masons don't allow me to call anybody hypocrites or got to your politics, I won't do that. So I did that all on TV. So what happened was I looked through the records and found that in 3 years when the DFL was in charge, they took money from MNCOR for other parts of the budget. In fact, last year there was 2 amendments to take money from MNCOR from my budget in the Public Safety Committee, and there was 5 amendments on the floor to take money from MNCOR. So it seems like it's okay to take money from MNCOR when it's you, but not them. So, and then the fire safety account is another dedicated account that we used to balance the budget. Both parties did that freely. So I guess we could, throw grenades back and forth and accuse each other, but that money will probably come back and spent on very good needs for the state of Minnesota and be put to good use.
I guess to your question, Representative Hillstrom, I guess I would say that if your committee finds a different place to come up with $1 million that they think would be better than that, I certainly would be open to that. But I do know there is some money available in the MNCOR account, and I think that was mentioned as one possible place that money could be gotten so that people didn't think we were actually cutting some other program that was funded last year. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Cornish. I wasn't saying I wasn't a hypocrite. I've taken money from MNCOR, and the question is that all the money that you're limited from taking. So are we going to see other shifts and other gimmicks within the budget, right? So if I can find another 3 million in another fund that's someplace else, are we going to see that added as part of the budget in any of these other places? I just want to make sure I understand the rules, Mr. Chair, as we are preparing to spend or not spend money in this budget, that we know where the parameters for the rules are here, Mr. Chair.
Well, Representative Hillstrom, I guess I am thinking you know the way this works. I mean, committees have the ability to make decisions, and if they think, for example, that perhaps there are savings available in one program because something's occurred in the last year and that program doesn't need as much money as we thought, it's certainly fair game for them to make a decision to take money out of that program, and if they then feel that something has happened where they need to spend more in another area, that's certainly the committee's prerogative to spend more in that other area. This is just the net target that they've got to end up with in the end, and we give the committee's discretion within that to make those other decisions. I trust the committee chairs all know more about their own budgets than I do.
So, Mr. Chair, again, just one last clarification. So that means that you did not give them a target that they can or can't spend in other funds within their jurisdiction? That's just a yes or no question.
Representative Hillstrom, well, I don't know if I know what you mean by the yes or no. I'll just simply say that, yes, they have jurisdiction or the ability to make decisions regarding other programs and other funds.
Thank you.
Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just don't want to pass up the opportunity to comment and express my disappointment for the ag finance budget, and that the fact that there's going to be a nearly $2 million cut. And I know that there's a lot of talk about how you can rearrange dollars and maybe reassign some things, but I just have to say that this year we've spent some time hearing in both ag policy and ag finance a number of really good proposals, and people have come forward earnestly and honestly feeling as though they had a chance at being able to get some things funded. And if that's not the case, I just know that there were a number of people that came forward thinking that maybe there'd be a chance to be able to get something, and there are some very serious issues. We have an emerald ash borer issue coming forward. We have a need in the vet diagnostic lab. We have some other things that are coming forward, so I just needed to make that comment. Thank you,
I guess
Mr.
I'd
Chair.
just say, Representative Poppy, I mean, I know there are some other programs that people have wanted there, and I hesitate to say too much with Chair Hamilton not here, but having talked to him about this, it's my understanding that there is some excess money available in some programs that is not needed there that he feels can be canceled without any harm to the state, that those needs can be dealt with in a different way, and that thus there will be some additional money for some of the programs that you're maybe thinking of. Representative Mahoney.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's kind of deja vu all over again. I looked at the Jobs Committee target, and it seems to be the largest at 11.6, but...
Are you suggesting that you've got an amendment to decrease that?
Increase that or decrease that?
Decrease that.
Oh, I think
I'm
you'll
just
do,
kidding,
I think you'll do
Representative
just fine without my help, Mr. Chair. But it essentially goes all to broadband. But it doesn't even fill, 10% of the need? It's more closer to 5%. And, if I was a sarcastic legislator, I might, as an urban legislator, say thank you, because you're going to keep all the jobs in the urban area, which, that's too bad, because I've always been a more broad-based legislator and tried to make most of the things go 50-50. Even your own member, Representative Baker, proposed $35 million, and so it's nice to know that we're not the only ones that are feeling the pain at the moment. But I'm a little shocked and a little saddened by that, because I know that where the having chaired the Jobs Committee, I know where the money will come from to fill in whatever you're going to fill in. And it is the money that the state uses to help businesses start up here. It is the money that the state uses to train laid-off workers. So your budget really does hurt the continued growth of the state of Minnesota as the star of the North, so to speak. You know, our economic track record has been great. It's because we've invested, and your budget is not going to invest. It's not only not going to invest in greater Minnesota, which was a big campaign theme I understood a couple of years ago. And it's not going to invest in our metros, and it's not going to invest in our workers. This is an amazing budget, and I have no empathy for Representative Garofalo.
Well, Representative Mahoney, I think you'll just have to see what, what we eventually get here. I think that there can be a good budget accomplished with this number.
Good luck.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, let me just ask one question. I have two. But the first is, we're talking about 900 million, and I don't think I know the split between one-time and ongoing money, and perhaps Mr. Marks can help us with that.
Mr. Marks, can you comment on that?
Mr. Chair and members, the balance in the current biennium is 900 million. The balance in fiscal 18 and 19, if you take all the carry forward money out of it and just look at revenues minus projected revenues minus projected spending in 2018, 2019 is 1,183,000,000. So it's not so much that I guess the question is, you can't do 900 twice. That would be 1.8 billion. You can do it a little bit more than once. And doing 900 of spending in fiscal 17. So the problem with it is that a particular program might cost $1 million in fiscal 17. It might be 1.2 million in 18, 1.3 million in 19. So it's kind of hard to say how much of the spending. I mean, basically, it's you could have 1.183 divided by 2, carrying forward for each year of the next biennium. So 900 million in this biennium, but it can't exceed 1,183,000,000 in the next biennium if the next biennium is going to be balanced.
For Representative Wagenius.
Thank you. That's helpful, I think, for all of us to understand, because I think people think there's more money than we have. So we were in capital investment, and I understand your caucus position of wanting to keep your debt service down. I understand that position. But if that is the position you take, then the consequence is we're going to have to spend more cash on things like asset preservation. I mean, that is the obvious consequence. So I'm still coming back to the capital investment budget and seeing that if we spend half of it for transportation at 300, and then we spend some of it for water at the governor's, I think that's 167, and that doesn't include Lincoln Pipestone. That means there's maybe 100 million left for the university and the state college system for asset preservation. So if we can't fund the asset preservation, then that's another kind of deficit spending. So I worry that we're going into two kinds of deficit spending with this particular bill. And that's, I would think that a lot of Minnesotans would share that worry.
Representative Carlson.
Yeah, Mr. I don't know if any others want to comment from our side of the aisle, and perhaps some on your side of the aisle may want to, but one of the things I want to make sure is we request a roll call vote on the resolution. And, but being that you recognized me, I do have a couple of questions. I'd like to go to education and either ask you, Mr. Chairman, or Representative Loon. One of the bigger numbers that doesn't necessarily appear directly in the budget resolution is the 52 million that's being, I'll use the term recaptured, and I don't necessarily mean that as a negative, but there's 7 school districts that have what's being described as excess funds. And I'm interested in what the rules of the, I think it's 48 million that would remain, or actually a little bit less than that, because you indicated to me earlier that 7 million of the 52 would go to broadband for school districts. But the balance then, and I assume it's kind of voluntary on the part of the school districts. That's what I heard today as to whether those dollars are surrendered. So I'm just wondering how that's being booked and if that's being distributed to just those 7 school districts or across all the school districts in Minnesota, or what, because that is the biggest item literally in the bill that's going to be reallocated. And then I have some follow-up questions as well.
I'll recognize Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Carlson. Just to clarify, there is no recapture from school districts on money. Like, I'm not sure if what you're referring to that way. What we actually heard in committee last night, and on a proposal that we would be considering, is that we have a number of districts that are under what's called maximum effort loans. These were loans that the state provided to school districts for building, and generally it's programs changed a bit from back in 1959 when it was created to which school districts are using it, but it's generally right now more rural areas with low adjusted net tax capacity in their area. And so there are 50-year bonds with the state, and generally the interest rates are, I would say, higher than market rate than what you could get by going out and refinancing. So we've done this in the past where we allow an opportunity for these districts to get out from under these loans because they're local property taxpayers, and in many cases it's farmers are paying this 29.39% tax rate every year on these the levies. It's very high. Actually, in one school district in particular, the locals found out that they may have an opportunity to try to get out from under this, and it created revolt. They voted against a one-day bond issue that the district had done a number of times in a row when they realized that they may be locked into this huge tax rate for 50 years. So if we allow an opportunity for these schools to pay back the principal borrowed on these loans, and I think it's something like the state has already taken in something like $14 million in interest from these school districts. They would be in a much better position to do their own bond locally, probably lower their interest rate, help their local taxpayers. And in doing so, the money that they repay to the state, again, comes into to our finances.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I said I was searching for a term to kind of describe it, whether it's recapture, redistribution, or whatever. This is going to be a block of dollars, and that was my fundamental question. There will be a block of dollars then that will be available to the K-12 Finance Committee, and being that that's the largest number of dollars, I was trying to get some feel for how those dollars then would be distributed within your committee. Or maybe put another way, will there be any instructions from your leadership in terms of how that money is to be used? I'm just trying to get a handle on who's going to benefit from that 40-some-odd million dollars.
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Carlson. Well, no specific direction has been given to me on the expenditure of those funds, other than apparently it sounds like you've had a conversation with Representative Knobloch perhaps about some broadband money, but that would be a fairly small amount of the approximately $52 million we estimate we will have from the repayment of those loans. And we've been hearing a lot of proposals before the committee on some things to help schools and to help school children in Minnesota, so we'll now work on putting together a bill.
It was,
Representative
Mr. Chairman, I hope I'm not talking out of school, but I thought this morning you mentioned that at least 7 million of that would go toward broadband, but to be used by school districts.
Yes, that's something that we have talked about, and that's the plan, is that $7 million of that 52 million would be a broadband program for school districts that would be designed by the committee, and there are really no other instructions for the committee that I'm aware of.
And that's what I was searching for, being that there was the one tie, how the other 45 million is going to be distributed. Well, the other thing is, there's not much spending in here, but are there any tails issues, Mr. Chairman? And any instructions to your committees relative to that? Because you are re-spending, if you will, 15, almost 16 million, if I recall.
Well, Representative Carlson, as you know, we generally don't adopt tails targets as part of a budget resolution, and so we're not adopting those, but we certainly want to keep our tails as low as we can. When you hear what Mr. Marks has talked about in regard to 2018-19 and some of the revisions with the budget forecast, there's certainly, some concerns about not wanting to boost up the tails.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, that I fully recognize, having had the chair that you have, that we don't have them in the budget resolution, but I know that both caucuses have historically, sometimes informally, given tails targets, and there's not a lot of spending here, but there could conceivably be some tails. One that would probably jump out would be how you're handling the broadband, I suspect, because that will be totaling about 20 million. I assume those are one time. In the budget resolution, you indicated that 13 million for
Yep,
broadband.
no, I understand.
would come out of
Representative
the-
Carlson, I think, from what's been discussed, that there'd be a total of $20 million, including the $7 million this
Yeah.
year that we just discussed with education and broadband. And then I know the only real sort of tails, so to speak, that I know of that has been discussed, and I haven't given any formal or informal tails targets to the committees, although that doesn't say that I won't be talking about that in the future, is an additional $15 million in tails for broadband in 2018.
Yeah,
So that would be a total of $35 million.
Mr. Chairman, I picked that up in your press release. Where you
Good reading, Representative Carlson.
where you pumped up your number a bit by going into the next biennium, but I don't want to debate the politics of that because broadband is important. But this particular budget resolution, however, puts a total of 20 million into broadband, then the 13 plus the 7.
For
is what
this
I understand
budget,
is
yes.
the instructions to the chairs on your side of the aisle. Tails become important because committees can sometimes have pretty good imaginations about how to solve some problems by moving things into the next biennium. And I'll only say that there's talent in that regard on both sides of the aisle.
I am aware of that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to encourage a no vote, but I don't know if anybody else wants to make any comments or not. And one of the things that bothers me about the situation is that now we sit there with basically 900 million in conference committee between the transportation and the tax bill. I think the total that you went into conference committee was something like 1.4 billion, if I recall, or pretty close to that. So obviously, there's going to be some changes with the new reality that it's 900 million. But one thing that I find troublesome, and you did comment that the leaders would need to work that out. And my concern is that that's going to come down to basically 3 people. And we have 201 legislators that right now we're into a second year of the biennium, things have changed greatly, and you're going to have three people, the majority leader in the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the governor, probably in the end, making the decisions on that $900 million. And the last time that was done was in the Ventura administration, and if you may remember, the one-third, one-third, one-third was the way they resolved it, but the rest of the legislature didn't have much input at all, and that's the situation that we have before us. They may reach out a little bit beyond that to, somebody like yourself, but it's going to narrow down to a relatively small group that will determine the big picture. And that I find, under the current circumstances, personally quite troubling. I recognize I'm in the minority, so probably wouldn't be in the room under any circumstance, but we are turning over the entire legislative process potentially to just those three. And I would hope that some people on your side of the aisle would have some of those same concerns. They may come back with two major bills that, will impact on what the chairs on your side of the room and other members have put 2 years of work in, and they've had no voice in the end, or very little voice. So with that, I would urge a no vote, and then after we vote, I do have a question of process, if you would.
All right. Any other discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll.
Knobloch,
Aye.
Albright. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Carlson.
No.
Cornish.
Aye.
Davids.
Yes.
Dean. Detmer.
Aye.
Drazkowski.
Aye.
Garoppolo.
Yes.
Gunther.
Yeah.
Hackworth.
Aye.
Hamilton, sorry. Hamilton.
Yes.
Hillstrom.
No.
Ornstein.
No?
Khan.
No.
Liebling.
No.
Loon.
Yes.
Mahoney.
No.
McNamara.
Yes.
Murphy.
No.
Nornis.
Aye.
Pulowski.
No.
Poppy.
No.
Torkelson.
Aye.
Berdahl.
Yes.
Wagenius.
No.
There being 17 ayes and 10 nays, the RES 06 resolution is adopted.